All right. You can see this, right?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Okay, great. Oh, it's only been 4 years since we've been doing Zoom. You would think I would have this down by now.
Well, but the word is the epidemic ain't over until everybody masters Zoom.
I've never heard that, but I would wholeheartedly agree with that. So, okay. So I was asked to put just, this is not very long. So, let me show you my agenda. I was asked to address a couple of things. There was some new changes to the 3-foot rule, governmental immunity or suing the king. Maybe a quick refresher. There's nothing really new there. What to do after a bike crash. It's just a reminder. There's so many things that are important to do, and of course, your adrenaline's pumping. You don't know who hit you, if you're okay, what's going on. So it's just a quick refresher and to emphasize how important it is to be proactive or get a friend or family member to help you out. And then of course, uninsured motorist insurance, which I'm hoping you guys have heard before. And if not, I'm going to say it again. So, okay. So in late 2022, the legislature deemed it appropriate to amend the 3-foot rule. Now, the 3-foot rule is still applicable. And just as a quick refresher, a motorist is not permitted to come within 3 feet of you when you're cycling on the road, right? So law enforcement, I guess, must have found this difficult to enforce because how did they know it's within 3 feet unless there's a crash? And then if there is a crash, well, you don't necessarily need the 3-foot rule. I mean, it's certainly helpful, but they didn't violate anything. Well, they definitely violated something on top of violating the 3-foot rule. So what they did, they amended it, and I've bolded for you the amended portion, right? So it essentially says if a cyclist is on the road and it's possible to change lanes, the motorist must do so. There is a plethora of exceptions. And question is a bike lane a lane or is it not a lane? And what do you do when there is no bike lane? So just to quickly address that, Vehicle Code Section 21207 permits public authorities to create a bike lane, and it says bike lane. So if you read AB 1909 as is, it's broad enough that it is its own separate lane. So if a motorist is traveling in, let's say if there's a 2-lane road with a bike lane, if they're in the number 2 lane and you're in the bike lane, they don't necessarily have to change lanes when passing the cyclist. Now they should do so if it's going to be unsafe or it's within 3 feet, but they don't necessarily have to. Now, if there is no bike lane, they cannot pass unless it's safe to do so, practical to do so. So there it is. I don't necessarily think this change in the law is super helpful, but it is something. It is the legislature attempting to put some more meat on this 3-foot rule. So, um, just as a note, a cyclist should be all the way to the right-hand side towards the curb if possible. And there are some exceptions to that. When passing a vehicle or a cyclist or a pedestrian, you can go to the left, into the lane, or if there is a hazard, or if you're making a left turn or a right turn or something of that nature. And of course, a cyclist can take the lane. And if you're traveling in a motorist lane, when there's no bike lane, I should say, that can be your lane, but a cyclist should be all the way to the right when possible. So if anyone has questions, please feel free, jump in. I'm kind of
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to ask a question that
yes,
everybody's going to
please.
ask, or at least would
I was
know. All
hoping
right.
this would be
So,
a conversation.
all right. So there's many places where there's a bike lane, but it's a door zone death lane bike lane. And
Hmm.
so I believe, I want you to either agree or disagree with me. I believe that it's my prerogative to say that is not safe for me to be there. I could be hit by a door at any time, and therefore I'm going to get in the lane.
Or so the question is, if there's a bike lane, but there's cars to the right of you,
And they're too
should you
close. It's a very narrow, it's like a
very
3 foot
narrow.
bike lane. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So I just want to read from, oh, not this.
Or would you be saying you got to go before the judge and convince him that, yeah, that's a danger.
So the law says a cyclist shall be in the bike lane, right? That's a starting point. But there's a number of exceptions that I've kind of outlisted. I think the hazard exception would apply there. So yes, if it's well, one, if it's possible to be in the bike lane, but all the way to the left, if that's sufficient, you should do that. Obviously, you wouldn't be asking this if that was the case. So and I do that too sometimes when I'm riding, mostly solo rides. I will be in the bike lane all the way to the left, especially when I could be doored because that's we've had a number of those cases. Um, but if there is a hazard, and arguably, yes, people opening doors, that could be a hazard, then you could take your lane. Yeah.
Okay. So is there actual case law or is that just a
Not that I've
prudent
seen.
man belief on it?
Not that I've seen. That's a pretty specific scenario.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Because that is something we encounter all the time, whether it's San Vicente or Anza or any number of places. My contention has always been I'm personally willing to go in front of the judge and explain, here's the hazard that I perceive, and therefore I'm taking advantage of the exception. But I
So
think you're saying that's not ironclad. It's never been taken to, a judge and somebody found that.
no, I mean for case law, it's got to be pretty specific, pretty contentious. And then judges have discretion otherwise. But the actual law, which I would cite to avoid debris or hazardous conditions, arguably potentially being doored, especially if it's a line of cars, like at a park or something like that. I
Right.
pass a park. Um, yeah, yeah, that could be a hazardous condition. You're stretching the law there, I think, though. Um, but if there is no bike lane, then you could just take the whole lane. You can go all the way to the left if you
No, no,
want.
I hear you, but this is a
Yeah.
very specific case. I mean,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
ride San Vicente a fair amount as an example, and
Yeah.
there's places there where there are large trucks that bleed over into the bike lane.
Yes.
They don't obstruct it completely, but again, now I'm down to 2 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's even a stronger position. If there are vehicles that are in your bike lane, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you got to be able to move and avoid that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that would
Yeah,
implicate another one of the exceptions, making it stronger. Yeah. There was another question, comment.
yeah, quick question. Say we're on a road where there's a bike lane, but we have 15, 20 people. Even though there's a bike lane, are we able to go out and take that lane? Perceiving maybe there are trouble in the bike lane, maybe not. But having that many people, are we able to take the bike lane
So if you
or
have
the road?
So I think this is a little subjective, but let me ask you some questions. So 15 or so cyclists, right? In a bike
Yes,
lane, and you're riding next to each other or all single file or mix and match.
yes. Yeah, let's put an example coming down Pacific Coast Highway.
Okay.
There's kind of a bike lane, there's not a bike lane, but we tend to double up
Mhm.
pace line. I mean, is that with no bike lane, or even if there is a bike lane, are we allowed to go out and pace line in the, there's multiple lanes, only in
Right.
multiple lanes.
Right. So if there's no bike lane, you could take your lane. That's clear. With a
Okay.
bike lane, if you're doubling up and you're within the bike lane, obviously that's fine, but you want to get out of the bike lane. And I think arguably, yes, that's fine. Are you passing each other as you're going, or are you pretty much in your order?
In your order, pace line, taking the lane, 2 lanes on the highway,
Mhm.
taking your lane. We do that in Marina Del Rey all the time, where
Yeah,
there's 2 lanes here and we take the lane.
I think that's a harder question. Yeah, I mean, I'm here to tell you what the law says, and if the law says if there is a bike lane, cyclists are to ride in the bike lane, and there are a number of exceptions that I've listed. Um, so I think it's a harder question. Now,
So
if someone hits you, if a motorist hits you, if they rear end you, I don't think there's necessarily going to be an issue with liability. I don't think they're going to get off scot-free in that sense. I would need more facts. But if you're just in your lane, if you're taking your lane and especially if it's a group, I mean, context matters here. But if there's a group, you're in your lane, there's a bike lane, maybe, some people aren't in it, especially if they're passing or avoiding hazards like doors. I don't see a problem there.
still on a 2 lane highway with a bike lane, going out and taking a lane 2 by 2 is questionable. Or should
Yeah,
we
we're
go
taking our
single,
chances there.
or should we go
Questionable. It's
single
questionable.
file?
It's questionable in the sense in the 2 by 2 where you're taking the number 2 lane in that sense. It's questionable in the sense that are you complying with the vehicle code? I I'm splitting it though in the sense that I don't think it's questionable unless there's more facts to that particular case if somebody hits you or if there's a pothole or something like that. Does that make sense
Okay.
and answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just trying, yeah, it does.
No one said the law is easy.
I know.
I'm just here to tell you what the law says and based on my experience of how these cases go forward.
Hey,
Okay,
Kevin, I
Kevin,
have a
I'll throw,
question.
go ahead,
Yes.
Dale.
I have a question. When I'm riding solo, like to go down to where the group ride starts,
Mhm.
I frequently ride on a road that says it's 2 lanes in the same direction, and the law says as far to the right as practicable. But if I ride to the right, it encourages people to pass me closer than 3 feet away. So I finally have schooled myself to get out into the traffic lane so that they realize I have to change the lane if I'm going to go around this guy, rather than them squeezing me into the curb, because they can't uh, resist violating the 3-foot rule.
Right, right. So you're taking your lane just in all circumstances, correct?
If, especially when there's 2 lanes of traffic or more.
Hmm.
If there's a single lane of traffic, then, I tend to try to give room. If there's some lanes are wide enough that, yeah, you can afford to have people pass you in the same lane.
Is there a bike lane
No, not in these cases.
Okay, well then they should be changing lanes according to the new
Right.
AB 1909.
That's how I understand it as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
It would be a different question if there is a bike lane though. That's
right.
that's the tricky part.
Understand.
So Kevin, I got one more for you. And yes, most of the time, the stereotype is you ask a lawyer a question, their answer is almost always,
It
well, it
depends.
But
Yeah.
hopefully this one is going to be a slam dunk. This is taken from real life.
Okay.
There's a bunch of us riding on Palos Verdes Drive west going northbound. There is no bike lane. It's a rainy day. There's an officer who stops us and says, you're supposed to be riding in the bike lane. I respond, there is no bike lane. And he responds, well, there's a virtual bike lane. Now, I resisted heavily saying, dude, that is bullshit. But and only if Kevin Culpepper would have been riding with me, I would have said it. But I believe you're here to say, yeah, that's just that there's nothing like that in the law. He's just making that up. That's correct?
I don't even know what he means by a virtual bike lane.
Well, there's a white lane that marks off a shoulder that is frequently filled with parked cars.
Oh,
There was
okay.
not a bike lane,
Labeled
though.
as a bike lane.
Okay.
Mario, what he said was implied.
Yeah.
Yes.
And imply, okay, right.
When
So-
when I got hit going up the hill back in 2012, the cop said exactly the same thing, that I was in a bike lane and there was no bike lane. There was the white line marking the edge of the roadway, but no
Right.
bike lane.
Yeah. It's called a shoulder, not a bike lane.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very bad. I think I would hope somebody would sue them to finally get that out of their vernacular. Maybe you can take that up, Kevin.
Probably not going to be me
We're-
taking on
We're
that.
counting on you.
So, all right. So vehicle code 21207 permits local authorities to establish bike lanes, right? If that white line is establishing a shoulder, not a bike lane.
Right.
That's how I see it. I think it's pretty simple. So Mario, yeah, I think that was a slam dunk.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's continue on. Hopefully not interrupt.
No, that's good. I'm glad we can get into this. All right. So because now I want to switch gears a little bit to suing the king, governmental immunity. And I pulled this up. This is a US Supreme Court quote. Just basically saying states, notwithstanding the Constitution, retain their sovereign immunity. They can decide when a private citizen can sue them and when they cannot. So that's, and I only point this out to show you how far-reaching this doctrine can go, right? So when California law that you can't sue the state or a public entity in a circumstance, this is where they're getting that kind of support, and hence the king, right?
Can they see you?
And I've put here the the governmental immunity for trails, which I think is going to be the most applicable to the cycling. I hear an echo. Scott, is that maybe? Okay.
Everybody, please mute if you're not Kevin.
I think it's good now. So, all right. So, all right. So this code section, if you can break it down into 3 subsections as the legislature has done: unpaved roads for essentially recreational use, including riding, which I've highlighted, any trail used for the above purpose, right? So the same kind of thing. Any paved trail that's providing access to unimproved property. And this subsection C, kind of towards the bottom, I thought there was an interesting exception that I wanted to kind of walk through. So in this circumstance, a paved trail to an unimproved property, the public entity is supposed to provide reasonable warning of a hazardous condition. Of course, then they qualify it with the last sentence, shall not be construed to be a standard of care for unpaved pathways or roads, right? So you would think there might be a little hope here, but there's really not. And that's the point of my next slide. This is case law, courts interpreting that same code section. And I've highlighted, I thought the nail in the coffin, so to speak. It doesn't matter the trail service. There is governmental immunity. So what that essentially means is if you're cycling on the Strand, that's a trail. There's a dangerous condition that has been there for 6 months or 6 years. It doesn't really matter. It's still a trail. It's used for riding or a recreational purpose. And there's absolute immunity to that. So it just be careful. I mean, it's kind of a tricky situation. When you're on the road, you can get hit by a motorist. When you're in a trail where it's supposed to be, you know, quote unquote safe for you to ride or enjoy recreational activities, then the public entity doesn't necessarily have to protect against any dangers. And the idea behind it, the policy objective behind this is to encourage people to go out and ride, to go out and fish, hunt, whatever they want to do in their recreational activities. And if it were the other way around, if you could establish immune or liability, well, guess what? Then the public entity is more likely to just close the park altogether. No one can ride. No one can, you know, do what they want to do and enjoy. So, right or wrong, that's the immunity that we face when we decide to ride on a trail. And it may not even say trail, but it's going to be construed pretty broadly.
So Kevin, we have
Yes.
something here that is not a trail. It's a 4-lane road, and that 4-lane road is moving 1 foot per week. So I believe, based on what you're saying here, the implication is when it's not a trail, when it's a well-used road, there is no state immunity. Is that an implication that I can hang my hat on?
Well, so you're saying it's a roadway, motorists can
Palos
go.
Verdes Drive South is moving 1 foot per week because of landslide and water conditions. And they're throwing everything they can at it, but they can't figure out what to do about it. And it does cause hazardous conditions. It does cause, I mean, we were just talking about it today. There still continues to be a large, what's called a ski jump now, where there's literally a huge dip in the road. And this thing keeps moving, so it's going to be different next week.
Yeah, I would not think that's a trail if it's a
It's
regular.
definitely not a trail.
Yeah, I mean it's a regular roadway. Motors can go on it. Cyclists can go on it.
4 lanes.
There.
It is signed for bicyclists and motorcyclists to take extreme caution because of the condition of the road.
Yeah.
Right.
There might, you know, context is again important. There might be something to be said that it's moving so rapidly and there's warnings about it.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is because on June 18th, the
mhm.
city council is going to consider closing that road to cyclists and motorcyclists. And there's a belief, at least if I look at bicycling in LA, their assertion there is that's against the law. You can't close the road to just motorcyclists and cyclists.
Yeah.
So something to ponder. You don't have to, but something to be aware of.
No, I think I'm aware that there's whole communities, right? Neighborhoods where property values have been going down because of this, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think we have some cases related to that in a different department. That's interesting.
Well, so for what it's worth, I mean, it's literally they're going to have this meeting next week. I intend to go there and at least say, I don't want you to close that road to cyclists because I don't know how long you'll leave it closed, and then I'll have to fight to get it open again. And I don't want to have another road closed like Del Amo's closed because of the oil refinery is there.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let me know what happens. Well, maybe you'll
All
probably
right.
email blast to the whole group. So, okay, that is interesting though. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so this is still under the category of suing the king, but some procedural requirements that I wanted to highlight because they can be one tricky, but also two, if you're not careful, you can lose your right to sue. So within 6 months of the injury or the accrual of the cause of action, you have to submit a claim, not a lawsuit, but a claim to the public entity, all public entities that could be, liable. And it can be tricky. We've had that situation where, just the perfect, this county goes here, this city goes here, there's a whole other city here, and then the crash is right right in the middle of all of it. So who's responsible? And then of course, is it a state highway? So it can be tricky, and it's best to leave that to lawyers to figure out. And then from there, once you make your claim, and there's requirements, what kind of information you should be providing in a claim. Most of the time, it's the basics kind of information. But a public entity has 45 days to accept, to reject, or just to ignore. They're not going to accept. I don't think I've seen a single example of a public entity accepting. I hear it's out there, but I've never seen it. Or denying is more likely going to happen. They're going to deny your claim, and if they ignore it, then it's deemed to be denied. It's the same kind of thing. If they deny it, though, you have 6 months from then to file a lawsuit. If it's just deemed denied, meaning they ignore it, there's still the 2 years from the date of the incident to file a lawsuit. But you have to do that claim first if there's a public entity. And if you're questioning if there's a public entity that could be responsible, you should call a lawyer. I mean, and the sooner the better. And this leads me up to my next point, what to do after a crash. And there are a lot of things you should do. And like I said earlier, it's not the best time to have a whole list of things that you need to do, because you're probably hurt and pain, wanting to get treatment. But there are plenty of examples where a case just died because we didn't know who was responsible. We didn't have any identifying characteristics or information about their vehicle, license plate. We didn't have, much less their insurance. So there is a lot of information that you need to gather from the responsible party pretty quickly. And a 911 call, getting the police out there, can help. And of course, they'll go through all the parties, who they are, get their statements, get the property information, document the scene, and they will usually put a conclusion. Now, I hear you about police officers and bias against cyclists, and that is a real thing. But the good news is an officer's conclusions are inadmissible at trial. You'd have to have the officer testify to it, which of course is years later. But it is still, a police report is very helpful in documenting the physical evidence and the statements, and helps us evaluate the case. So
I've seen or I've heard of an accident on a bike where the police officers were there, and it was kind of like Greg's accident. You know, somebody goes down, something happens, and they put it as the rear person's fault because they were following too close.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
you
and
know, we
whatever they
ride
can hang their hat
bicycles.
on sometimes is all they need.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had those cases, and we've had to combat that. So it's not helpful when an officer has an unfavorable opinion, obviously, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're right. And that's why it's important to get other physical evidence documented. Take your own photographs, track down that witness's phone number, that they saw what happened, ask them, where are you willing to help? Keep your clothes, your bike, preserve them. I know everybody wants to go and get back on the bike. They've got cracked ribs and broken femur, and they're saying, when can I get back on the bike? But just hold on. And that bike might be permanently damaged beyond repair. Anyway, but the bike can tell us a lot. There might be paint transfer that can help us establish who was at fault. If there's damage to a helmet, that could help us determine the severity of someone's injuries. Pictures of the scene, multiple pictures, and of the vehicles involved, very helpful. Just one or two is not going to necessarily give us all the information that we might need. Multiple photos, each one tells a different story that when we look them all together, we have a better idea of what happened, especially if there's a question as to what happened, right? So there is a lot of information to gather. There might be surveillance videos from a local store. Those are quickly deleted, usually 30 days or so, but it could be longer, it could be shorter, but they're on a loop. So you'd have to get an investigator out there pretty quickly to copy the video if the store owner is even willing to give it to you, or the police might have it, but that's usually for pretty severe catastrophic cases. So you got to move quickly, and lawyers have the resources and connections to help you with that. We're obviously not there, so friends and family that you're riding with or that can get to the scene pretty quickly, that's going to be helpful. And of course, get treatment as soon as possible. I tell almost every client this. I think, pretend that there is no case. What would you do? Would you go to a doctor? Would you not go to the doctor? But the consequences of not going to the doctor are real, and there's real impacts to a case with that. But also just get yourself checked out. See what's going on. If it's just, some scrapes and bruises, maybe not necessarily required, but if it's something bothersome, oh, more than a couple of days, yeah, you should probably get yourself checked out. So that's my spiel there. Any questions, comments?
A lot of us have cameras.
Cameras are really helpful. Yes.
They might have version 1.0 to them, but we've gotten, my own personal cameras have resulted in 2 arrests. So
It's great.
I think it's important.
That's great. No, yeah, cameras is obviously the best way. Just make sure they're on.
Yeah, well, but that's the important thing. So the cameras we do have mostly are set and forget.
Yeah.
Most people who carry GoPros, that's got limited battery to them, so you tend to be, judging about when you turn it on and off. And sure enough, most of the time it's off when there's something important that just happened.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Okay, and uninsured motorist coverage. Just anybody that has not heard of this or is confused by this, raise your hand, yell out. I'm just kind of curious. Well, I'll just take it that you all have a vague understanding at the very least.
Well, you've been our sponsor for more than a decade, and you've driven this message home, I think. But the bottom line is uninsured motorist coverage is what comes into play if we're out on a bike, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to hear that we've annoyed you to death with this.
No. We got to have the annual reminder.
Yeah. So, all right. So just very quickly, it's the insurance that allows you to protect you within certain limitations, and it's usually cheaper. How it works mechanics wise, you have to exhaust all third-party policies first. So, an example of that, a real world example, actually, the minimum in California is 15,000 for liability insurance. Now, if you have uninsured motorists of 50,000, you have to clear out the 15, then you can get an additional 35 for a total recovery of 50. So your insurance gets a credit for that. So a lot of times people have the minimum of 15 and it's just not enough. So yeah, that's when I say it's the insurance that allows you to protect yourself. That's what I'm talking about. A lot of times I'll hear from clients, I have full coverage or I had full coverage. I don't know what that means. Full full coverage doesn't necessarily mean that you have it. So you might, if you are questioning, just check your declarations page. Does it say uninsured motorists, underinsured motorists, UM/UIM? You don't want to be caught without it. So I will, unless there's questions on it, I will stop the soapbox on that.
What,
15K might get you the medevac to the hospital. That's about it.
Yes.
yeah, what do you recommend as far as
At least double it.
policy, limits? I mean, I know there's like 100, 300 or something like that. I don't know if it's the same for uninsured and
You could,
underinsured, but what can you give us some guidelines? I mean, you obviously worked on lots of cases and things like that. What would you recommend?
I mean, so as far as what coverage you should get, I mean, that's kind of an individual analysis. I think you should have it at the very least, and you should have more than the 15,000, because if you have 15, it's just not quite as effective. But you should have more than the minimum. And now you can bring it up to your, let's say you have 100,000 in liability, the insurance that protects someone that you may hit or injure. You could bring it up to that same level. You could bring it up to lower, whatever it is. The 6 figures, 7 figures underinsured motorist policy, that's going to be for catastrophic injuries, and cyclists are, they're more vulnerable than your average motorist. There's not a huge metal box around them. So there's that to consider. Now, something lower, maybe, low 6 figures or 5 figures, 50,000, whatever it is, that is okay. It may be that we clear that out and it may feel like it's not enough, but it all depends on your damages. So what should you get? That depends on you. It is cheaper per increasing than it is increasing liability. I'll tell you that much. So it's hard to say, but those are what I've noticed. The higher the policy limits is best for those catastrophic, really terrible situations. And that's when you need it.
That's through our auto.
Through your own auto insurance. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I will definitely check that out.
It can't hurt. Can't hurt. Okay. Well, that's
Are you done presenting, Kevin?
I am done. That's it.
All right, I want to show something then.
So, Kevin, you saying the auto insurance policy covers us if we're riding our bikes, the uninsured motorist, underinsured?
Correct. Yeah. So what everybody has to have, the minimum is liability insurance, 15,000. You hit somebody, oh yeah, I see that. So you see bodily injury liability above your cursor, 250 per
Yes.
person. Medical payments, which is a separate thing, but you can use that. That's pretty good. Not everybody has it. But then yes, uninsured motorist bodily injury.
So, okay. So that's if we get hit by a motorist, right?
And they don't have enough insurance. So
Okay.
your average Joe
Yeah.
Schmo has 15,000 or something less than, in this example that Mario's showing, 250, right?
Yeah.
And your damages have to warrant full 250, but I mean this is why you have it just in those cases. Now, the opposite, right? Let's say you get hit by a commercial truck. Their policy is going to be bigger than this 250. It's probably going to be $1 million, I would guess, each time. So Mario's 250 wouldn't come into play because the third party exceeds the first party. But you don't want to take that risk.
Can the
had no
insurance company
idea.
be weasels if they misspelled my name?
That means you're not covered and you're screwed, Mario.
Okay.
I'll have
I
to
have
ask.
another task tomorrow.
Well, I had no idea that my insurance policy my auto insurance policy would cover something on a bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's probably not a widespread thought as far as people.
That's
be
why I
honest
keep
with
bringing
you.
it up.
Yeah.
But also the other thing though is if you cause an accident, if you run into a car, it comes off of your house policy, not your auto policy if you're on a bike. Ask me how I know.
I believe you know. And I believe you're correct. Yeah. That is a strange. I've had the cyclist for cyclists and the homeowners policy come into play, but the cyclist versus a vehicle, the homeowners coming into play. That makes sense. Never had that, but that's interesting.
All right. Any other final questions for Kevin? All right. Well, thank you very much, amigo. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate the time.
All
Thanks
righty.
for your help.